Welcome to Public Health Matters, the show that addresses public health issues that matter the most to the citizens of Harford County. Real issues, real people, and the information you need to know.
Hello, I'm Molly Mraz, Public Information Officer for the Harford County Health Department, and your host for today's Public Health Matters. It's the show that takes a closer look at the public health issues that matter the most to the citizens of Harford County. In the United States, the prevalence of symptoms of anxiety disorder in June 2020 was about 3 times more than those reported in the second quarter of 2019. The prevalence of depressive disorder in June 2020 was about 4 times more than those reported in the second quarter of 2019. This is according to the CDC. Today, we will be talking about the pandemic's toll on mental health with Pam Llewellyn, Executive Director of Safe Harbor Community Services, and Dr. Jennifer Maxfield DiCarlo, Director of Clinical Services for Safe Harbor Behavioral Care. Welcome to our show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Sure,
Good
welcome.
to be here.
Pam's a regular, and this is your first time here, so welcome.
Yes.
Really appreciate you being here today to talk about mental health, and I think it's such a big topic always, but especially right now during the pandemic.
Yes.
And we'll just start off with, if Pam, you want to tell me a little bit what you do at Safe Harbor.
Sure. Well, Safe Harbor has been providing counseling in our community for over 25 years. We have counselors all over the state, as well as up and down certain areas of the East Coast. So I have the honor of being able to take that experience and expertise of Safe Harbor and opening up a new division that can serve the public mental health sector. So I'm very excited about that initiative.
That is very exciting. Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Doctor?
Yeah, so I'm the clinical director, and I get to work with our counselors to really help them be the best that they can be. I do a lot of clinical consulting and things like that, and I also see clients too. So I get to keep my feet in that as well.
There you go. You kind of get to be a little bit in touch with them.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yep.
Very nice. And so, how has your role shifted at all within the past 10 months of the pandemic? I'll start with you, Jen. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I think the thing that comes to mind for the biggest piece is really moving to telehealth. We have offices and people come into the office, and all of a sudden with the pandemic we had to change to telehealth. So that was a huge change. Using the computer to connect with people and be able to provide services right in their home.
And how do you feel people have adapted to that? Well or not well? Or it's causing more stress and anxiety?
Yeah. You know what? I think all of the above.
Yeah. Right.
Right. It's for some, we get to go into their homes, and so that makes it so that it's a little more personal. Mm-hmm. We can see what's going on, and we can talk to them right in their homes. And then for some clients will just say no, like I don't really want to do that. Like I feel like I need to be in person.
Right.
And some of them changed their mind after the pandemic kind of went on. They said, okay, now I really want to come back, and it changed to telehealth.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And what about you, Pam? Has your role changed at all in the past couple of months?
The transition to telehealth, I think, has been new universally, not just in the mental health sector, but it certainly has allowed us to be able to offer immediate access to care, which was always kind of a hidden barrier before to accessing care. There was things like the stigma of mental health, and then just being able to be transported somewhere to get to a counselor or to a provider. And so the shift to telehealth has really allowed us to break those barriers down and give people care right in the moment when they need it. So that's been a positive change for us.
That is helpful. And then you think about how many people are now going to be more tech savvy after all this, and that's kind of a positive too, you know, if you think about. But what do you think is the biggest mental health challenge in the past 10 months?
That's a hefty question, because there's a lot of different facets of mental health that are impacted by the pandemic. But what I've seen mostly is because we are in this stage of sort of a forced and necessary isolation, it's really brought about a lot of feelings of loneliness for people. It can exacerbate pre-existing depression or anxiety that somebody may have already been struggling with. So I think that's been a huge impact during the last 10, 11 months. And then also, because people are away, I mean, I believe that people are created to be in relation with other people, and you need that social community network to thrive. So we've taken that away, and I think in that regard, folks have lost that connectivity. So along with that loneliness is just feeling like hopeless, and it's kind of heightened some of those depressive feelings for folks. So that's kind of the most impact that I've seen.
Yeah. I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think that one of the things that we do as counselors is often help people learn new skills to cope. And a lot of those skills to cope are reaching outside into the community and connecting with people and connecting with activities. And when those things are shut down, it's harder to find things that they can use to cope with their depression and anxiety.
Right. And now you see so much of, kids are really, you see all the social media and you hear the kids are really struggling because they need to be back in school and have that social interaction. The parents are struggling because they're having to work full time and teach their kids virtually at home. And the seniors are struggling because they are essentially really isolated and they can't even, see any loved ones if they're like in a nursing home or something. So it's really taken its toll on the community. And so what kind of, you mentioned, like, what were the other topics that you were mentioning about the different facets?
Right. The other impact that I've noticed is, coronavirus being a kind of a novel virus for us. We learn different things about it over the past 10 months as time has gone by. So when the professionals learn more about the virus, the information to the public changes. So what you thought you knew about it yesterday is different today and changes tomorrow. So that can leave folks feeling very anxious and worried and concerned, more so than usual, because there's not a consistent message, because there just can't be while you're learning something that's brand new. So I've seen a lot of the impact in terms of just fear-based concern, worry, and when you have that foundation shaken like that and you don't know who to trust and who not to trust, it can really present itself in a lot of different ways for folks on the anxiety spectrum.
Are your clients more, your patients more anxiety and depression associated with those kind of symptoms, or what symptoms have you seen the most?
I've seen a lot of depression and anxiety, but then also kind of what Pam was talking about too is just this intense loneliness, fatigue, right? I've seen the ups and downs of people, hey, oh, we can make it through this, we've got this, and then it goes on, and so then there's like the slump back down into, I don't know how long I can do this. And so just the endurance and the fatigue that I've seen a lot of with a lot of clients too.
Yeah, like we thought this was going to be like, okay, see you in 2 weeks.
Right.
And then it turned out to be this long. And even, I was talking earlier, people who are like thriving in this environment, right? Like they're introverts, they like to be isolated, they don't really like to be out all the time. But I feel, it's just my personal, I feel like even those kinds of people are kind of struggling with the pandemic as well. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. I think, I have 2 children, and one of them is more introverted, and she is thriving, but there's also this base of, I miss my friends. I miss the structure of going to school and the consistency in that and the safety in that reliable thing I used to do every day has been taken away. Right. So even though they're externally they look to be thriving, they're good students and they're doing well at home, but internally I think is a much more difficult nut to crack, because you don't always see those internal workings of folks that are kind of struggling quietly, and a lot of introverts are experts at struggling quietly.
Yeah, so I do want to talk about the kids, because it's such a important topic, but how would you be able to crack those introverts? Like, how would you be able to know that they're really struggling? Because I think that's really important to know any kind of warning sign. Jen, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think across the board with kids and with adults, we've been teaching people, like, it's important to do an emotional check-in. Like, how are you feeling right now? Let's just take a moment and talk about how I'm feeling right now. Because we get so busy in, even just doing the video stuff and school and trying to work from home, and we get in that, it's exhausting. And so being able to sit down and say, okay, how are we feeling right now? How are you feeling? And teaching kids to be able to do that, parents helping kids to just like identify, how am I feeling right now? What's going on with me? I'm anxious. Why am I anxious? What's going on? And be able to talk about that is really, really helpful for kids.
Mm-hmm. And so for the kids, just what do you think from your clinical perspective, the impact moving forward that maybe having school virtually for a year is going to have on their mental health? I mean, can they, some will come back from this, like some will be okay and this was just like an okay year, but others might have a really hard time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's fundamentally changed folks for the better or worse. Mm-hmm. There's certainly outcomes from this that we won't know for a couple of years.
Right.
And so it makes me think back to after 9/11 happened, and a couple of years after that, there were studies that came out for children in particular who weren't even alive during 9/11, but as every year has gone by and they've heard their parents talk about it, and they've seen the videos every September 11th on TV, and they hear the stories, they have secondary trauma from that. They weren't even alive when it happened, but because it's kind of a repeated theme and it's brought up and they're exposed to images and stories, they found that years later these children were having secondary and tertiary trauma symptoms from it. I'm not equating the two events, but we don't know the long-term effects for children yet of having to, for about a year, be isolated from that consistent, reliable school structure that they've known, and to be thrown in a whole other universe at home all the time.
Right. Mm-hmm. And some people, this is like aside, but like some people don't even have a safe home, and school was the only safety net for these kids, the only time they were really fed. So there's so many challenges for children not to be in school, and so thank you for your feedback with the kids. Would there be any other, aside from the mental health check-in, the emotional check-in, what else would you say to parents who are really struggling because they don't really know how to help their kids who are clearly struggling with being at home?
I think there's a couple of things that they can do. First, and I know this is going to sound odd during a pandemic, but it's so important to stay in community. That's going to look different now. Maybe most of it is virtual, but especially for the kids that are used to having more freedoms. I'm talking about like the teenage kids who are used to driving here and there and doing everything, and now that's been different for them. But to stay connected to youth programs, there's a lot of good rec programs, youth programs, church youth groups, things like that are doing a combination of virtual and safe, distance, masked, in-person type of activities. So stay in community is the first thing. The second thing is turn off media. I think parents have a responsibility to know how much exposure their kids, especially the younger they are, how much exposure they have to the news, to social media, to watching television, and the parents can be intentional about turning it off. And when you have conversations with your kids, like Jennifer was talking about, be honest with them about what's happening, but also hopeful and encouraging. That's so important, to be affirming and encouraging to children.
And we were talking about this previously, about the social media impact on children right now. Do you want to talk about that too, about how social media just in general has its toll on children's mental health?
Sure. I think the number one thing that, and I probably, I feel like sometimes I sound like a broken record, but I don't believe that we were made to absorb the fast-paced, constant news feed that we expose ourselves to 24/7. I mean, we do need time of rest. We're built that way. We do need time to not be bombarded with good or bad information, just constant information. So without the pandemic, it's very important that we set boundaries for how much TV we watch, how much we scroll social media and get on social media, just for our own mental health outside of a pandemic. And then you layer on top of that a pandemic that has forced everybody into a virtual world. Now what's happening is, in addition to the information overload, you're taking the very important social and developmental stages of childhood where they learn how to interact with other people and they learn emotional intelligence from that real-time interaction, and that's been stripped away and replaced with a virtual platform. So I think we have to be even more intentional about making sure that as best as we can and as most responsibly as we can, making sure those connections stay intact, whether it's getting together with just the immediate family, having family dinners together so that you have that relation together, connecting people with groups in your community and things of that nature.
So the difference, can you just talk about, you hear people talking about pandemic fatigue, and what's the difference between somebody who's just feeling the fatigue from the pandemic versus somebody who is depressed? Is there a difference? Would you kind of lump it into the same? Jennifer, go ahead.
You know, the thing that I really look for is how people are functioning, right? Is so, you know, we all, through all of this, it's normal for us to feel sad, for us to feel isolated, to feel lonely. Those are all very normal reactions to what's been going on. But when it crosses over into not being able to function, right? We have folks who are feeling really triggered and they're getting frustrated and angry and things like that when they're having trouble getting up in the morning, right? We all want to stay in our pajamas, right? This is what we've heard. Everybody wants to work in their pajamas, but at some point, if it's crossing over to like, I can't even find the energy or the motivation to get out of my pajamas.
Right.
Well, now we gotta look at what that motivation is and what's going on and how people are functioning is where I kind of would draw that line.
Right. Same.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like Jennifer said, it's normal. All of us at some point in our lives are going to go through periods of anxiety and periods of depression. It's just part of life, and we're all going to have to, for better or worse, have peaks and valleys. And the difference, I think, clinically is your functioning capacity during those peaks and valleys. So if you're in a valley but it's just not peaking at all, and so you're staying in the valley, if the way you're functioning today, whether that's at work, school, in relationships, at home, if the way you're functioning today is markedly different than you were functioning a few weeks, months, or a year ago, that is more of a clinical depression that maybe you have to, or whatever the mood disorder is there, but you have to get some help for that.
I have a statistic here. The CDC did a study last June that reported 40% of U.S. adults are struggling with mental health or substance use. Have you seen an increase in substance use? Have you seen an increase in overdoses? Can you speak to the substance use part of it? Yeah. Jennifer, we'll start with you.
I think this kind of rolls right into our conversation about coping, right? Is that people are at home, they're isolated, and their ability to cope with the challenges that they're having. I mean, we have to remember that it's not just the pandemic, as far as like illness and fear about that. It's also that people have lost their jobs. People are struggling financially, all of those kinds of things.
Right.
So I think that those also are playing into how people are coping.
Right.
And sometimes when they don't have a way to cope, they turn to maladaptive behaviors. And sometimes that's substances and things like that. So we have seen that increase.
And then have you seen it with Safe Harbor? You've seen your numbers increase with those behaviors, or not necessarily?
I think from my perspective as a counselor, I've seen a lot of people who are actually reaching out for help because they're seeing the behaviors and thinking like, I don't want to go too far here with this. I need some help. And because, like Pam was talking about, the stigma for mental health and that telehealth lets us come right to them, they're more willing to engage in therapy, which is good too, because people are noticing some of the behaviors like substance or maladaptive things that might be happening.
You talk about the different, not necessarily the pandemic, but they could have lost their job. Well, what about essential workers that they're essentially even healthcare workers just being completely exhausted, and just how are they coping?
Yeah, that same study that the CDC did last June of 2020 also indicated that psychological distress during the pandemic was heightened for certain groups, including essential workers, young adults, unpaid caregivers, and racial and ethnic minority communities. So I think, those populations we have to pay attention to. They're at higher vulnerability for depression and anxiety. We need to be able to reach out and to get them access to care and to make sure they're supported especially through this pandemic.
And how do we reach the ethnic and minority groups? Because it's such a challenge in general, I think, with at least for us at the health department and in Harford County. But how would you suggest reaching out to them?
Partnering with each community. There is a very good group of minister leaders in this community that meet regularly around health topics. So partnering is probably the number one way to affect positive change in any population.
And I guess with the ethnic minorities, especially the African American community, necessarily being affected more by the pandemic than the white population. Why do you think that is? You think still access to care and go ahead, you can.
I mean, access to care is always a concern. And not just access, but the ability to support them through the use of now what we're thrown into, which is technology dependency. So making sure that the access is there, but also the support around it is there, and that people know that there are things that are available to them, that there is a increased awareness around this is what you can do, and just wrapping around those communities and letting them know that the support is there.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with all of that. Is being able, we've had lots of churches who have reached out to us throughout this whole pandemic and said, come talk to our youth. Can you, and we'll do it virtually. Like we'll go and we'll talk with the youth, or talking with school systems. Like how can we support teachers as they're supporting parents so that they can support the kids, and really help reach out into the community that way.
And do you feel like they're pretty receptive?
Yeah.
The kids, though, too, you think they're receptive to, sometimes it could be scary for them to have like somebody strange talk about them and, ask about their feelings and things like that. But that's good. That they're being receptive to your help.
We have so many counselors that do play therapy. And, when this all started, we thought, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do it? And they have come up with just amazing ways. They could play games right on the computer and really engage in the therapeutic process just like they were in an office. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
What about some successes? So we've kind of talked about the sad parts, but some success stories that you may have seen throughout this pandemic because of the services that you've been able to provide. Do you have any, what helped those individuals, Pam?
I think what Jennifer said, we have counselors who went through special training to be able to learn how to do play therapy with very young clients, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, virtually. And I don't know if everybody thinks the same way I do about 3, 4, and 5-year-olds trying to use a laptop for any period of time.
Right.
It can be a challenge.
Right.
So we have a whole set of counselors who went through specialized training to be able to do that. And it's been hugely successful and impactful for the parents especially to know that their child still has access to that care. You don't have to cut it off and wait a year and come back when we're in person. That continuity of care has continued through the pandemic for them.
Right. And then you feel like, what ways do you, that behavioral therapy can help somebody, whether it be substance use or, somebody who's not using? Jennifer will go.
Yeah, I think that being able to provide the services to folks as they're coming in, we're able to still meet them where they're at. We're able to engage them in the process of therapy. And I have seen successes. I've seen people who maybe wouldn't, like Pam was saying before, come to therapy because they've got a disability or transportation is an issue or something like that. And we've been able to see them. And this pandemic has been like an equalizer. Everybody's stuck in their home now. And so now the people that sometimes they felt like were passing them by are engaging with them because now now everybody's home, and so there have been successes on the other side too. I think of people being able to really grow in the midst of this as well.
And were you going to continue your telehealth services after the pandemic? Do you think that's just something that you've implemented now forever?
I think most agencies would
Yeah.
answer that yes. I mean, you're able to reach more people, and people are able to get more care. So it's a win-win.
Right. What age group do you see at Safe Harbor? I mean, you mentioned the little kids, but I mean, I didn't really know that young. So you see from like 3 to how old? Anybody?
99.
Yeah, and older maybe, right?
Yeah.
The whole spectrum.
Yeah.
That's great. And then do they have to, what are any qualifications? I mean, talk about just any kind of, do they have to meet any kind of criteria for eligibility?
Not necessarily. We have, we have a fantastic intake team. So if someone wants to access care and they go to safeharbor1.com, there's a phone number there, or they can request care online. And our intake team is trained to be able to sift through, okay, what location do you want? What type of counselor do you want? What's the main issue, so we can match you with somebody who has a specialty in that area. What age are you looking for? So they do a really great job at matching people with exactly what they need.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What do you want to leave? We have about 2 minutes left. What do you want to leave? Pam, I'll start with you. Leave a message with folks right now.
I would just say, the number one thing I think that concerns me through this is that people won't reach out and get help, that they will quietly struggle, and that they will just keep waiting for the next day. So my message would be, don't wait. I'm obviously biased towards therapy. I think everybody should go to therapy, and I love therapy. But it can be tremendously helpful to talk with someone who, maybe they're not an expert in you. You're an expert in you, but they know a few things that might be able to help you along the way. So don't wait. Don't let it drag on. Get help, and get help now.
That's a great answer. Jennifer, how about you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think too is just making that first step. Right? People get so scared sometimes about making that first step and making that first phone call. I've seen a lot of couples that are coming in too. They're stuck in the house. They're all doing their work from home, and it's changing the dynamic of couples. And so, saying, you know what, we've got the time now. Let's do this. And our insurance says we can do it, and we can do all of these things, and we can access care. Let's start doing it. You don't have to have a problem. You could actually just work to grow even further, and work on communication, things like that. So I would just say that I'm biased towards therapy too, obviously, but there's so much that people can accomplish and come out of this having grown even further than if we never had a pandemic.
That's great. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. Therapy works, therapy's there, and reach out for help, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that is all we have time for today. I would like to thank my guests on today's show, Pam Llewellyn and Dr. Jennifer Maxfield DiCarlo. If you would like more information on mental health, please refer to our resources page after this program, and join us next time for another important health issue that matters the most to the citizens of Harford County. Thanks for watching.
You've been watching Public Health Matters, brought to you as a public service by Harford Cable Network, your county connection.